Some introductions tout your resume. Some introductions tout your pedigree. Some introductions lie and say how awesome you are. This introduction, I hope, will be as honest as I can possibly be. I am the son of formerly enslaved people, and so I am not impressed by resumes or pedigree. I think they lift up and foster and uphold white supremacy, and so I'm not going to do that. But I will tell you what I am in love with: a white man and or woman that can walk in brokenness, that can enter into their pain and or the pain of people in their sphere of influence. And in my life, I have some wonderful friends, colleagues, one of which you will hear from in a few moments. He, Troy, is a good brother, one that isn't afraid to enter into pain. And so out of all the things that I can say to you about him, the thing I want to say is what I think his wife would say. He's a lover. What I think his daughter would say: he's a protector. What I think his son would say: he's compassionate and caring. What I would like for you to know is that he's a good brother, my next of kin, a brother that can enter into pain.
I think we're in a time where people are really worn out. We're feeling more and more isolated and feeling less and less able to go into the world with courage or vulnerability or intention. And we noticed that folks needed practices to be able to slow down. We tried to create a place where that can happen, where you can catch back up. And we wanted that to be a place where you can do it with others. That mindfulness and contemplative practices, yoga, creativity, they don't need to be a solo sport. The Hive is a place that folks can get together into groups with connection with one another and connection with what's happening within. Part of our secret sauce is getting folks into small groups, because so much transformation happens at that level of 5 to 12 folks. Quite literally, when you get together in a group, you can try on new ideas and you can say, I don't know, and I'm still learning. And you can live into the question in ways that you can't really do with an app or an online video. Holding that type of openness with other folks, it has a different type of quality to it. You can sit the same way with a group of people, and if you're all quiet, you can even catch each other's eyes, and you can recognize right now there's magic in the air. The thought would be you do this for 6 weeks, and you do this for 6 months. You do this over the course of a year with folks, and you start to realize it changes the way you raise your kids. It changes the way you talk to your colleagues at work. It changes the way you engage with strangers, even enemies. All these things, these choices, they kind of bubble up and go, I can be intentional with my life. So the Hive has a number of different classes that fit into 3 different categories. We have art classes that include poetry and journaling, collage, that sort of work. We have classes around action that range from entrepreneurship to trauma-informed care to active nonviolence, even improv classes. And then we have classes around contemplation that range from yoga to other body work like Qigong and meditation and Christian centering prayer, engaged Buddhism, different ways for folks to get together in multi-week classes as a way of learning a contemplative practice and actually practicing it with other people. The ability to engage this frenetic pace that we live in starts with new habits. What the Hive creates is an opportunity for members to support one another in this growth. It's really built by helping folks be neighbors to one another. And Hive classes and experiences are built around this notion that wisdom is spread across the group. And over time, a community like that has a type of impact on a neighborhood and a city and an entire region. It takes courage to say, I'll sign up for that class. I'll try one new thing in an area I haven't before. but there's enough of me that's ready to try a new way of showing up in the world.
All right, so I'm going to invite you to stand up for just a minute with me.
I think we're in a time where people...
And we'll watch this all over again, and you say a word or phrase that sticks out to you. There we go. Here we go. Without any words, we'll just start with this. Just kind of warm your hands up and set them here on your heart. Take a breath. Notice your feet underneath you. And then if you're willing, would you just repeat after me here? That's the whole thing. We're going to do it again, and now I'll invite you to repeat after me with your voice as well. Christ above me.
Christ above me.
Christ beneath me.
Christ beneath me.
Christ before me.
Christ before me.
Christ behind me.
Christ behind me.
Christ to my left and to my right.
Christ to my left and to my right.
It's okay if you bumped into Christ there. That's good. Mm-hmm. Christ within me. Christ within me. Just go ahead and settle into that for a second. Feel those feet underneath you. The mystery of Christ giving itself away is your very life. Or as our Sufi brother Hafiz would say, I am a hole on the flute that the Christ breath breathes through. And then he says, listen to this song, to this life. Your own 2 feet, your own life, the mystery of Christ revealed as you in this moment, our ancestors' lives, our neighbors' lives, those we resist, their lives. The mystery of Christ pouring itself out as this concrete, immediate moment. All right, y'all can sit down. Thanks, Ronnie. Where did he go? He already went to coffee. He's done. As I was thinking about the invitation to do this today, I was thinking about belonging. And Ronnie said that I'm not a fearful person, and that has more to do with my song and dance than what's really going on. And I think one of my biggest fears is the fear of not belonging. As I thought about different stories that would kind of go to what is the vision behind the hive, what's the experience of that been, what's the experience of my life been, it felt like I had to keep talking about that's the stuff that's It's being tilled up in this work. It's like when the frost comes to an area like Cincinnati, this never really happened in Atlanta, it'll heave up the soil, right? And sometimes our fears and our anger and our anxiety serve that purpose, these survival strategies. It's no use shaming them, but they heave some things up, and what do we do with those? So when I was in seminary at Columbia Theological Seminary in Decatur, I wondered, do I belong? And if a few of you that are here remember that, I was kind of coming in from different tribes and trying to figure my way around it. And I was auditioning to be a Presbyterian. And from the very first admission interview, when I was asked why a graduate of Liberty University and a former Young Life area director would want a reformed education, just let that sink in. Yeah. I was kind of on the back of my heels the whole time. Fear not, don't be afraid. We did a thing in seminary called mid-course assessment, where somebody, you have a wingman or wingwoman, and then you have the faculty, and they're trying to help you discern. But all of us braced ourselves for that moment. Discernment felt a little difficult. And I remember my wing woman at the time saying, if you believe that transformation happens in small groups through possibilities instead of fixes, and that the way you're going to start through possibilities and fixes and through making art in meals, then why are you trying so hard to get permission to preach to people in rows and to sing from books and to serve meals in tiny plastic cups and to make decisions by majority rules? This was supposed to be my wing woman here, but so while in seminary, my wife and I lived in a mixed income community in in East Atlanta named East Lake Villages, and we learned a lot about belonging in all sorts of new ways. Having places where kids could come by if our neighbor Lucia had to work late. Taking kids to the farmer market to pick out vegetables and then learning to cook them together. We even had a three-legged cat. You can't buy them that way, but the kids in the neighborhood didn't know that, and they're like, I can see your three-legged cat. And they'd come knock on the door, where do I get a three-legged cat? Extended families belonging to one another. Belonging. Eventually, I was ordained to validated ministry in Southwest Atlanta, working with neighborhoods to cultivate belonging between elderly folks, African-American folks, union employees that had worked at the car factories that had recently closed, civil rights leaders, hipsters and rock bands, and young city planners, all mashed into these neighborhoods. And I was learning the power of belonging and to confront people with their freedom, to move from conversations of crossroads into places of possibility. And I applied for that work to be called a church. At that time, I thought belonging meant the tradition saying, yes, that's a church. And the presbytery was really gracious, and at that time, this was before 1001 new worshiping communities. They were called NCDs. And we got an NCD grant, and folks were generous with us, and I was working with Emergent Village to ask about questions of colonialism and belonging kind of questions. And at a certain point, we went to an event with folks from this group called Neighbors Abbey. We went to a Presbytery event, and the person that stood up at the beginning said something like, nobody's sitting in the front rows, we Presbyterians. And those folks all looked at me and said, what do you mean we Presbyterians? What are we doing here? And that led to a group of conversations, and the Presbytery helped kind of discern this moment that maybe this isn't best for Neighbors Abbey to move forward as a Presbyterian congregation. And with that came a lot of pain and confusion about how does that work. If you remember a few days ago, we were talking about that notion of the Spirit of God that fills up our body. The Spirit that knows the depths of God filling up our body, that Spirit funds us. It gives us the energy and the metabolism and the strength to go into the work we do. And for a moment there, that Spirit just started moving somewhere else. It looked like a lot of pain. There was a kid in the neighborhood stole a big SUV, and all of it was street parking. And when my wife and 6-year-old daughter were sitting on the porch, somebody came through with their car, totaled our car into our other car. Right there, they saw that, and then he drove away, so it gave us a chance to get a family van. And then a 100-year-old tree from across the street fell on the family van. And then we were hit by the mortgage crisis that happened. We bought our house in 2007 for $180,000, and then it appraised in 2011 for $37,000. And my wife was getting tired, and my daughter was developing anxiety, and I was getting depressed. Working as hard as we could. We knew what we were doing was important, but now the houses around us were getting boarded up. And it was really hard to just kind of pull out the lamest white flag I could to go, what now? So we moved to Cincinnati. That was supposed to be the joke part there. But there's a lot more to the story, but I would say that part of it was this interesting moment of that flag when you're asking these questions about belonging. Sometimes it's embarrassing to look back and ask how you asked those. And so I interviewed in churches all over around, and found one in Cincinnati. I was looking for a church that would call themselves healthy, and this church was really proud to be healthy. Yeah. I've since learned the hard phrase of St. Francis where he says, we must all bear patiently the weight of not being good and not being thought good. There were some good things from that season with that congregation, and after 2 years, kind of getting our feet straight, we did begin to feel like Cincinnati was home enough at least. And the stories of Cincinnati about the civil unrest and the collaborative agreement, the kind of character of Cincinnati. It's an entrepreneurship space. There's small cities like Cincinnati use per capita to describe themselves. So there's more entrepreneurs per capita in the Cincinnati region than any cities besides New York and the Bay Area. So it's like there's kind of that kind of energy going on. There's some difficulty around the neighborhoods here. You can see the tension and the challenges of that. This was ground zero for the shift in the election in 2008, Hamilton County right here. There's a lot of things about this space that had begun to endear my heart to the place here. Fell in love with Cincinnati and our little neighborhood called Northside. And I met a woman who was going through a spiritual awakening. She was in Al-Anon and kind of was finding her higher power, and she started having these conversations saying, I want to talk more about this. And before I knew it, we were in a small group at her house reading a Richard Rohr book on the spirituality of the 12 steps called Breathing Underwater. She'd invited the whole crew. I was the only man in the group, and half of the group was straight, and the other half of the group wasn't. And folks were coming from all sorts of walks of life, and every once in a while they'd kind of scratch their head and say, are you allowed to do this if you're a pastor? And then eventually they said, I wish there were a place where we could do this. Wish there were a place where we could connect intentional, contemplative practices and transformation and caring for our city. There were social workers that were part of it. And out of that came this vision for a place, kind of a small community that we would call a hub for contemplation, art, and action. Thankfully, my friend Dustin, after about half a bottle of bourbon, said, that's not an evocative name at all. So we came up with the word hive because the notion that there's a lot of things moving in and out of that space, honoring that there's some intentions to what it means to come in, honoring that we leave with some intention, but really recognizing the fact that belonging isn't about whether you get into this place or not. It's kind of a low threshold kind of a place. We rented and renovated a 1,500 square foot building, 2 classrooms and a kitchenette. And we were able to bring together folks around classes around nonviolence, the other things that you heard here. And folks began to kind of go, what else is here? And from that, we began to talk about membership. And we've been able, fortunately, through grants from 1,001 New Worshiping Communities and donations from other folks, to where 50% of our revenue comes from folks who say, I'm paying for classes or I'm paying for a membership. And then 50% comes from outside funding and donations and folks that say, I believe in this kind of a place. At each stage, the vulnerability of saying, I don't know how to do this is where the edge of this sort of thing grows. And sometimes I think it's weird to kind of think about how to have this conversation because I know a lot of us are working in congregations. I currently also serve as a stated supply pastor for a small congregation 5 miles from my home. And inside the structures of what we work on, we often kind of get afraid of what might change. We get afraid of the risks, and so we don't know how to ask for help. And what this has kept teaching me more and more and more is how to ask, how to go into a vulnerable place and say, I don't know. And one has to do with funding that I want to share before we close. There's a gentleman that was a part of actually the congregation that I came here to serve, retired from Procter & Gamble, really happy-go-lucky person that I thought would end up being kind of a funder for the work that we do. And so a year into things, I come with him and say, here's what we've done. Here's our giving rates. You have, the high, the medium, the baby bear, and then the just give us something, those different things. And I was like, I'd love for you to be in the mama bear or papa bear zone or something like that. And he goes, I'll go home and talk about it. And he came back and he goes, I don't think we've decided we're not going to give to this right now. I hope that doesn't affect our friendship. I hadn't really thought of him as a friend before he said that. And I realized that just making space for those responses you get from folks, you begin to recognize how many of us are walking around recognizing and looking for belonging, and how many of our projects get in the way of that. Do I belong if I give to this? Do I belong if I'm a member of this? Do I belong if I'm part of the we? The great mistake is to live the drama as if I'm alone, as if the life is just playing out and I'm trying to figure out where will I get it right so that I do belong. And I'm telling you, in your body is where you learn that you belong. And the body of the other that you talk to is where they're going to learn that they belong. We have to free each other to experience that, to notice that. I started with that quote from Hafiz. In your phone you can put reminders, and so sometimes I'll put those little quotes until it kind of gets into my head. And one day one came to me that was kind of an extension of that Hafiz piece. And it was this notion that there is it hasn't gotten into my head, obviously. Here we go. This notion that there's enough around me to do this. There's enough around me to do this. If infinite love is giving itself away as your very life, then whatever your congregation is to build, it's already around them. If your family's life is given away by God's very breath, if it's animated and brought, then you already have within you. It's not like you have it within you and you have to set a tap in there. You have to quit searching for it out there and begin to believe it's in you, which is a very scary path. So this phrase kind of rang to me that I have enough around me to make this. And so I just call on the people who sing yes. Holes on the flute, making a symphony. Right here, you can kind of hear it. Holes on a flute, making a symphony. Together, making a city. The great mistake is to think you're alone in this work. We anchor our hope to this idea that I'll belong if I can get the future thing to work itself out. If you belong right here, then you can just get to work. The mystery of Christ revealed as your very life. Thanks.